If I may, I will draw the questions to a close and ask the Chief Executive of the BHA, Nick Rust, to come to the rostrum. And I will say that after his presentation, Nick will be delighted to take some questions from the floor. All yours.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much to Nicholas and to council members for inviting me to speak again. This is my third time speaking here, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honour to have the chance to speak amongst my fellow members. I hope I won't bore you with coming up for the third time. Certainly there's a lot to get through, and I'd like to begin with a brief reflection on where I see our sport today. And then I'll move on to the importance of togetherness, touching on what Charlie covered, and a good approach to managing the governance of our sport. When I first addressed you in 2009 as Coral Managing Director, prize money was about to fall below £100 million. This year, as Charlie has covered, it's going to be £160 million, or expected to be, with mid and lower tier prize money boosted significantly as an effort to help retain racehorse owners and grow their numbers. Be in no doubt that this has been a real team effort from British Racing. Media companies upped their game in 2007, 2008, from then onwards. British Racing's leaders pulled together to lobby government with a single voice about levy reform from 2010 onwards. That effort, together with the practical outcomes of the Authorised Betting Partner Initiative, which, whilst raising significant and much-needed revenues at the time, clearly demonstrated that a voluntary solution to the levy would not work. That led Tracy Crouch and Karen Bradley to implement levy reform. We're grateful to them. And I'm pleased to say that in 2017-18, the first year of the new levy, receipts are expected to be between £90 and £95 million, compared to less than £50 million in the preceding year. As well as contributing to increased prize money, this funding is helping us to do the following things. Invest in plans to attract and retain owners. It actually hasn't been covered in too much depth today, but Charlie and the Racehorse Owners Association are leading on this for our sport, and we're proud to work with you on it. Investing in marketing activity to grow the appeal of our sport. And you may have seen one of the first investments made by Great British Racing on the back of this has been the Under-18s Go Free campaign featuring David Williams. Investing crucially in equine welfare strategy and the Horse Comes First campaign. And finally, with this week being, as Charlie said, Racing Staff Week, which is a magnificent initiative recognising those who look after your horses every day, we're putting more money into the recruitment, retention and training of our workforce. Outside of this funding, since I last spoke to you in 2015, the number of horses in training is up. Betting on British Racing has shown year-on-year growth for 3 years based on Gambling Commission figures against a landscape of long-term decline. Returns to owners are up and moving the right way. Terrestrial TV audience shares are improving. British Racing has a reformed disciplinary panel structure which is now being copied by other leading sports. And the Racing Authority, with representatives of horsemen, racecourses, and the BHA, led by an excellent chair in Sir Hugh Robertson, is in place and ready to distribute levy monies from 2019 upon completion of the necessary legislation. The tripartite so-called members' agreement has brought much fruit, giving a full and formal involvement for the BHA's members in important decisions affecting the future of our sport. As Charlie said, we are making progress by working together. Our sport does face some challenges too, of course. Yes, the government's understandable action in restricting fixed odds betting terminals will likely see some acceleration in the closure of betting shops in Britain over the next few years. But betting shops were, unfortunately, slowly in decline already. And British Racing's rights holders, some of whom are in the room today, of course, knew they would need to reposition those rights over the next few years anyway to meet the needs of a betting market becoming increasingly digital. This needs to be done working closely together with our betting operator partners. building on a strong current relationship. However, in my view, racing's real challenge is not a potential fall in revenues because of legislation affecting betting shops, but rather our overall relevance to the British public. How relevant are we to young people, to sports fans, to people who bet? How relevant are we in the digital world? How relevant are we to people who are not from a white, heterosexual, able-bodied background? Current evidence suggests we still have much to do. The average age of racehorse owners is still increasing. We're number 2 for sports attendances, which is great, and also the average age of the racegoer is getting younger, but we're not in the top 10 sports for overall interest. It's our relevance that will drive betting, attendances, engagement, media coverage and media value, participation and employment, and of course drive revenues to make our sport run. In truth, we are all struggling to keep pace with changing behavior of consumers. If we're to be relevant to a wider audience in today's digital world, British racing needs strong and effective leadership, direction and regulation to address the challenges and the risks our sport faces. Together, again that word, we're about to work on a vision and values as a sport. Great British Racing and the BHA are working on this with and for our members. Owners will be crucial, and Charlie is involved in the steering group, which began meeting last week. Outside of our work with our members to help grow the sport, the BHA manages a unique set of regulatory responsibilities compared with other sports. Looking after the welfare of our sports horses, keeping racing as safe as possible for jockeys, racing staff, and racecourse workers, and ensuring the sport is fair and clean to bet on, and fair for those of you who are racing your horses. Because of this, the BHA has a key role to play as racing's governing body, needing to do and being seen to do the right thing in all circumstances. Integrity and accountability must be at the heart of the BHA. But as the governing body, we're also tasked with leadership, not the autocratic or personality-driven kind. Governing racing is about building support, seeking consensus, and of course, often mediating between the divergent interests of our various stakeholder groups. It's also being ready to take tough, unpopular decisions when necessary for the good of our sport. We represent racing to government, where the people the media call, and we're where the buck stops for British racing. That means we do a lot of scanning of the horizon, looking out for potential risks. We're paid to have sleepless nights on behalf of our sport. And when my executive team sat down earlier this year, we identified a number of things that we felt could disrupt our sport and which loom on the horizon. Some of them do give us sleepless nights, and some of them have in fact since begun to come to pass. They included, firstly, the impact of a changing political landscape. And it's hardly pretty stable at the moment, as we've already reflected on from what Chris said, including the potential for a new government taking a tougher stance on areas such as betting or equine welfare, because we know that about half the public think our sport is cruel. We are already seeing a traditionally conservative, on these matters anyway, conservative party looking at issues concerning matters such as shock collars for dogs and the sentience of lobsters. Secondly, a high level of equine fatalities at one of our major race meetings, such as Cheltenham or Aintree, skewing the public's view of jump racing and leading to increasing pressure for the sport to be restricted or banned. We all saw what happened at Cheltenham. 6 fatalities at the festival, and our team is working towards the conclusion of a consequent review we announced, working with all parties, trying to improve and safeguard our sport. Thirdly, the impact of Brexit's been touched on, more specifically employment status and the eligibility of workers who are currently here and who we might wish to come in the future, and the risks linked to the movement of horses and disease surveillance. British racing and breeding relies heavily on the free movement of racehorses and bloodstock. Over half of all runners are bred elsewhere. Fourthly, the exposure of wide-ranging safeguarding issues relating to the duty of care owed to our sports workforce, including mental well-being, possibly linked to working hours and servicing the fixture list, drug use, bullying, sexual harassment, and racial abuse. We have a responsibility to deal with those risks. Fifthly, a breakdown of the sport's governance structure, including the embryonic racing authority, damaging the sport's reputation with government and resulting in internal conflict that undermines industry growth plans. And finally, as I've already touched on, changing consumer behaviours and their impact on the future of our sport and its relevance. There were plenty more that didn't make the top 6. We still have an eye on those 2 in our work. Linked to managing those risks, we have a host of projects in train in keeping with our core objectives. To keep racing clean and fair, we're looking at stewarding, as you know, to modernise it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and to improve race day management generally and the consistency of decisions. We're looking at our rules and working on a rewrite to simplify them, make them digital and easier to understand for the people they affect. We're examining the risks from buying and selling of racehorses and bloodstock. We're concerned to ensure that transparent and fair practices are in place so that existing and potential owners get a clear and fair deal. To keep racing competitive and compelling, we have an ongoing project to improve our fixture list and ensure it works harder for the sport in terms of driving commercial revenues, while at the same time looking after the well-being of our participants and, of course, keeping the interests of our owners at the front of mind. To look after our horses, we have an equine welfare strategy, and to protect the sport's reputation on welfare matters, we have the Horse Comes First campaign. The ROA are members of the steering board of that organisation. David Sykes, our Director of Equine Health and Welfare, has an ever-increasing focus on tracking and caring for our horses before they reach the racecourse and after the end of their careers. To this end, we've recently emailed a survey to all registered owners regarding the aftercare of horses. This survey will be invaluable in guiding policy in this area, and we'd be most grateful if all of you would kindly take the time to complete it. To look after our people, we have projects around recruitment, retention, safeguarding, and diversity, and more on the latter in a moment. To secure long-term sustainable funding, we're working on levy extension and investing the funding wisely with our tripartite partners. Clearly, the sports funding has a direct impact on you, all as owners. You have seen our commitment to ensuring you get a better return on your investment, especially in the mid to lower echelons of the sport, where we're directing nearly £10 million more in the form of prize money in 2018, which has been magnificently matched by contributions from all racecourse executives, meaning that the vast majority of races staged in Britain now have a minimum prize money of at least £6,000, compared to £3,500 for the last 10 years, and a knock-on positive impact as you go through the next class levels. We know that owners are crucial to the health of our sport and that we should not take your investment for granted, which is why we in turn are investing in you. So as you can see, the responsibilities of the BHA, your governing and regulatory body, are wide-ranging. And it should be noted that all of this is in addition to our day job, providing race day regulation, licensing our participants and racecourses, registering owners, managing racing's administration via Weatherby's, and dealing with unplanned events and issues. That business-as-usual activity also includes looking after the sport's reputation, dealing with government, and spotting legislative threats and opportunities. We represent the sport and try to demonstrate together that it's well-regulated and well-run under the current tripartite structure. Government tends to agree with that, hence its support for funding and its public praise of our approach to equine welfare. However, British racing must never be complacent about that. The events of recent years have put sport in general under unprecedented scrutiny. FIFA's troubles, allegations of state-sponsored doping in the Olympics, a culture of fear in British cycling, which nearly cost it £43 million of state funding, sexual abuse in football, all have raised difficult questions about the values in sport and the way they're run. Reputations have been shredded, commercial futures have been jeopardised, and participation has been put at risk. Government rightly expects sport to comply fully with its Sports Governance Code published in 2016, which covers matters such as good governance, diversity and inclusion, safeguarding, anti-doping, and so on. It has shown it will act to intervene if necessary to reduce or remove the independence of individual sports. Specific to us, there's also currently a parliamentary petition led by animal rights groups, calling for a new independent regulator for British racing, which is just 25,000 signatures away from possibly being debated in Parliament. A new statutory independent regulator for racing might give you some sleepless nights. Whilst we have a strong position in ensuring this will never happen, and the BHA is always open to change to meet the needs of our members and shareholders, any future reshaping must not inadvertently weaken our sport's ability to remain independent and govern its own affairs. Returning to the sports growth agenda, there's one area which is so obvious and so important that we simply must do better on it: our sport's diversity and inclusion. Perhaps it's fitting to talk about it this week, as yesterday marked the 90th anniversary since full women's suffrage was achieved in Britain. The cause of suffrage is, of course, closely linked to our sport because of Emily Davidson's fatal intervention in the 1913 Derby. Moving forward to today, racing is Britain's best performing major sport in terms of the gender balance of its audience, with 40% of our racegoers being female. But look around you at most race days and you'll see a sea of white faces. We're proud that our jockeys, male and female, compete on equal terms. But look at a race card and you'll see only 5% of rides being taken by female jockeys and only 1% at the top level. Sneak into the boardrooms and offices of the sports stakeholders and you'll see it's mostly white men, like me, making the industry's big decisions. And how many individuals within our sport are prepared to openly identify with an LGBT orientation? Progress is being made across all these fronts, but we need to do more. And the case for this is clear, not only from an altruistic moral standpoint, but very, very much from a commercial standpoint, attracting the right audiences to our sport. For this reason, I'm pleased and proud to inform you that the Sports Diversity and Racing Steering Group, which we established in September last year, and which I currently chair, will tomorrow be publishing the sport's first ever Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan. The action plan covers 8 core areas, which we believe can and should be addressed to promote greater inclusion. In British racing, along with a series of associated recommendations which it is hoped will lead to short and long-term benefits from helping British racing to better reflect the diversity of the wider society in terms of the sport's governance, participation, racegoing and fans. I am confident that we are making progress. We've made that progress by working together as a sport towards common goals, and together we will build a brighter future for our sport, our horses, and our people. I hope you have a great lunch and the best possible luck over the coming months, and we'll see you in the winners' enclosure, hopefully. Thank you.